scopes are used on many types of firearms, including but not limited to various rifles, shotguns, and handguns. When you purchase a new scope for one of your firearms, it is important that you zero it so that you can actually hit what you are aiming for. But more importantly, understand where your bullet is traveling. I can't think of anything scarier than shooting a gun and having no clue where your bullet is going. When you sight in a scope, you want to work from a close distance to start, say 30 or 50 yards, and then work your way back to 100 and even 200 yards. The reason for this is quite simple. Any inaccuracies of your scope are amplified the further your target gets from your rifle. For instance, 1 inch off at 50 yards will be 2 inches off at 100 yards and 4 inches off at 200 yards. The first step that needs to happen when sighting in your rifle is getting on paper so that you can assess how far off the scope is from where the bullet is actually landing. When taking your first shot, I recommend using as large a target as possible. I personally am sometimes stacking 2 large targets, one on top of the other, and I'll cover the reason in a little bit. In a perfect world, you'll set up a target at 50 yards, take your first shot, and end up somewhere on the paper. But in practice, often you may not be on paper at all. At this point, you have 2 options. Be proactive and invest in a good laser bore sight system prior to buying your new scope, or do it the ugly way. If you purchase the laser bore sight system, you'll want to laser bore sight your rifle prior to going to the gun range at all. It can be very difficult seeing the laser in the bright daylight, so I recommend doing this in a safe indoor space where you'll be able to see the red dot easily. Often the laser itself will be placed either in the chamber of your rifle, or the laser may come as an adjustable attachment that slides into the end of your barrel. Once the laser is shining down your barrel, you'll want to place the laser somewhere about 10 to 30 feet out. From here, you make the appropriate adjustments on your scope to line up exactly with the laser. There are recommendations floating around the internet that you'll want to adjust your sighting accordingly to account for the difference in height between your scope and barrel, but I've only ever found making such adjustments to be confusing and often slow down my sighting process quite a bit. At this point in my life, I'd recommend simply to line your scope up exactly with your laser bore sight. If you do not have a laser bore sight, you will have to get on paper the ugly way. The ugly way may require a partner to keep a good eye on where your bullet is going when you take the shot. I tend to find it very useful to have a very large backstop or sand pit of some sort to assist in getting the sighting of your scope started. You'll want as big a target as possible. Pick a point on a sand pit or very large target and take your first shot. Let your partner know what you're aiming for. Hopefully at this point your partner will be able to tell you if your bullet hit high, low, left, or right. Adjust the rifle accordingly for the next shot and repeat until you're reasonably close. Whether you've laser bore sighted your rifle or done it the expensive ugly way, you should be able to get a bullet on paper at 50 yards. When taking your first 50-yard shot after laser bore sighting, I will often stack 2 large targets, one on top of the other. The reason I do this is pretty simple. I find that often the windage of the scope is near perfect after laser bore sighting, and I often need to make very little adjustment left or right. What I find to be off most often is the elevation. This is because, as discussed earlier, there's an inherent difference in height between the scope mounting and the barrel. Above and beyond that difference in height, every combination of rifle and ammunition is different, and it's near impossible to predict. This impossibility of prediction of how the rifle and ammunition will interact is exactly why I never bother to align my scope sights anywhere but exactly on the red dot when laser bore sighting. Once you're on paper, you can start refining your sighting. When sighting in your scope, it is a good practice to remove the human factor as much as possible. At the very least, you should be using a bipod or shooting sticks. If you have the budget, it's a good idea to have a rifle shooting rest. It's also a good practice to take 3 shots before making any adjustment at all. You'll want to focus on windage first. Make any adjustments left or right to ensure that your bullets are hitting in line with your bullseye. Next, you'll adjust your elevation. When adjusting elevation, it's important to understand that bullet trajectory is an arc and not a straight line. I recommend setting your zero for 50 yards on every rifle and shotgun. At 50 yards, your shots will fall a little low at any distance under 50 yards. Your shots will place a little high at 100 yards and generally be close to right on at 200 yards and then fall from there. If you zero your rifle at 25 yards, for instance, you will be dead on at 25 yards. From there, your shots will place high at 50 yards and even higher at 100 yards, 150 yards, and 200 yards, and you may be on at 300 yards. If you zero your rifle at 100 yards, then you're going to be low at all yards leading up to 100 yards. And your shots will place low beyond 150 yards. Comment below if you'd like a comprehensive field day in the future where I demonstrate the concepts discussed in this video. Thank you for watching, and as always, if you'd like to see more videos like this, please hit that subscribe button.